Chapter 2. Tatars of Kazan and Orenburg. When the Russians took control of the kingdom of Kazan and incorporated it into their empire, a large number of Tatars displaced by the war and those who had not taken up arms fled in crowds to the Tartarian states not yet subdued. This caused the kingdom of Kazan to experience greater changes than other conquered regions. The Tatars who remained in Kazan, along with the old inhabitants who returned to their homeland, were intermixed with the colonists from the Russian nation. The government of Kazan included Permia and the provinces along the Vyatka, though these areas were not fully incorporated into the ancient kingdom of Kazan. The Tatars are now dispersed throughout the government, although the largest number reside near the city. The Tatars of this government are estimated to number over 10,000 males. They occupy two connected suburbs of the city of Kazan, one which features two mosques built of stone and several minarets or very tall round towers, remnants of their ancient city. The other suburb contains two houses of worship built of wood and referred to by the Tatars as medreses. All other Tatars in this region live in separate villages at small distances from each other, surrounded by Russian territories. As the Russians advanced in their conquests, the vanquished Tatars became aware of the leniency of their new rulers and the security they found in their civil and religious rights. This realization made them reluctant to disperse further. Many Tatars of Kazan have changed their former residences with the government's permission and moved to other areas more suited to them. These migrations have likely increased their numbers. This dispersion increased the number of colonies in the surrounding regions, particularly in Orenburg, Tobolsk, and parts of Voronezh. These immigrants typically take the names of the provinces and rivers where they settle. However, their way of life and their faith remain the same as the Tatars of Kazan, so in this respect they will be regarded as part of the same group. Care must be taken not to confuse the Tatars of Orenburg Kazan with the Kyrgyz and other nomadic hordes of this region who live a pastoral life. The former, simply called the Tatars of Orenburg or the Tatars of Ufa, live in the city and lines of Orenburg along the River Earl. Some are scattered, while others are gathered into specific suburbs, some living in villages and others found in the small town of Kargala, situated on the river Sakmara, 18 versts from Orenburg. This place is a colony of Tatars from Kazans, first settled in 1755 by orders of Saik, their elder or chief, who as early as 1773 paid taxes for 2,160 males. The area is prosperous, with 4 medreses or chapels and several large stone houses. Those stone buildings are uncommon in the surrounding countryside. The Tatar citizens and villagers of Ufa are ancient emigrants from Kazan and are fairly numerous. In the province of Orenburg, there has been a colony for a century past, which takes its name from the small river Ichken, occupying several villages. In the government of Voronezh, there are Tatars from Kazan who live in a suburb of their own near Kazimov, along with other small colonies, including in Astrakhan and Tobolsk. These colonies are dispersed among the Russians, but chiefly live among other Tatars. The number of Tatars in Orenburg Kazan are greater than those from Kazan proper, and their dispersed colonies are not inferior to the latter. Kazan, the ancient capital of this kingdom, takes its name from the word kettle, referring to its shape in the Tatar language. A servant of Khan Alan Bek, the founder of the city, let a kettle fall into the small river Kavanka while trying to get water for his master. These Tatars agree that they are not an indigenous people, but are descended from a mixture of warriors who formerly settled these parts, along with other strangers who were brought there by the commerce of the region. Among these, the Nogais Tartars made up the majority. The appearance and character of the Tatars of Kazan and those descended from them are quite uniform and may serve as characteristic examples of the Muslim Tatars in the surrounding areas. A tall man is rarely seen among them. They are generally lean, with small faces, fresh complexions, small noses, and small mouths and eyes, which are often dark. They have a sharp look, with deep chestnut-colored hair that is straight, lank, and turns gray by old age. For the most part, they are well-built. Their upright posture, modest form, and mild or timid manners give them a rather agreeable presence. They are proud and jealous of their honor, though their capacity is fairly average. They are negligent without being lazy, active in every sort of craft work, and fond of cleanliness. They value sobriety, frugality, and compassion. These virtues, which they acquire from education and precepts of their religion, are strongly adhered to. The Tatar women are wholesome in complexion rather than beautiful, with strong constitutions. From a young age, they are accustomed to labor, modesty, retirement, and submission. The Tatars of Kazan, as well as other Muslim Tatars who live among them, take great care in educating their children. They teach them the value of work, sobriety, and strict adherence to the traditions of their ancestors. They are taught to read and write in the Arabic tongue and to follow the principles of their religion. The parents believe it would be a grave error if they neglected their children's education. For this reason, even the smallest village has its medreses or chapels, its school, as well as an imam or priest, along with a mudir or schoolmaster. However, these priests and schoolmasters are not always very knowledgeable in the Arabic language, as they are often taken from the plow and commonly have to earn their keep through labor. In the suburbs and larger villages, there is a school for girls, where they are taught basic history in addition to other lessons. The best Tatar academies in the Russian Empire are those in Kazan, Tobolsk, and Astrakhan, which are directed by the Guguns, or high priests. It is not uncommon to find small collections of historical anecdotes in manuscripts in the huts of the Tatars. Their merchants who possess these little libraries are often quite knowledgeable about their history and their people, and that of the surrounding states, as well as the antiquities of each. Those who wish to advance themselves in theology send their children to the schools of Bulgaria, which are more advanced than others. The Tatars' religious calendar is based on the teachings of Islam, which began at the time of the flight of Muhammad, known as the Hijra, to the Arabs. This event falls in the 586th year of the Christian calendar, which is the year 1193 in the Tatar calendar, as of 1779 in the year of Christ. Their new year begins in March on the day of the vernal equinox, and their entire calendar is aligned with the phases of the moon, the sun, and the stars. Due to their dealings with foreign merchants, they have invented alternate names for the months of our calendar. For example, they call March Hamet, April Sawyer, and Friday is known as Jume, the first day of the week. The Tatar citizens of Kazan, Orenburg, and other areas are engaged in commerce and practice various trades. Some even run factories. Their method of trade is well established. Trade among the Tatars, as well as with most Oriental peoples, is primarily conducted through bartering. Coin is rarely seen among them, and bills of exchange are almost never used. For this reason, both the merchant and the clerk must be personally present at all purchases and sales. They're often required to stay away from home for a year or two, and sometimes even longer. Journeys of this sort are always made in groups called caravans. The Tatars are not particularly enterprising, but they expand their networks through partners and clerks. Many of them engage in a great deal of business, which their frugal way of life makes highly profitable. The Tatars of Kazan, particularly those of Kargala, handle most of the trade from Orenburg to Bolsk and generally any area involving the Kyrgyz, the Bulgarians, and other Asiatic nations. At Kazan, they trade in the yufs, a term meaning a pair of anything, because two skins are always tied together, and goat skins, and produce large amounts of soap. Shoemakers work mainly with Moroccan leather, and they embroider their boots with gold. They are skilled in several mechanical trades in which they excel. However, since these jobs provide small profits, they do not devote much attention to handicrafts, which they deem less necessary. Due to their constitutions and lifestyle, they forego many things, which we consider to be necessities. The villages of these towns range in size from 10 to 100 families. Every village has its own history, and most people can write. These villages were initially composed of wandering shepherds like the Bulgarians, but over time they gathered together through successive generations. Gradually, they shifted from a nomadic lifestyle to cultivating the land and constructing fixed dwellings. The present generation excels in farming, with agriculture as their primary occupation. They never leave their fields fallow, which is why they use more manure than the Russians. The Tatars have a particular interest in beekeeping. Many of them are highly skilled in this area and benefit greatly from their work. Generally, every village contains a good number of tanners, shoemakers, tailors, dyers, blacksmiths, and carpenters. The hard-working women spin and make cloth from the fleece of their sheep and thread from the hemp they grow themselves. The women of Oralsky Gorodok make a fine fabric called the armak from camel's hair, which they weave without dyeing. The frame they use to weave is similar to the one used by the Russian peasants to make garters. The warp threads are tied around a stake fixed in the ground, and using a lever, they alternately raise and lower the threads, allowing them to weave the fabric. As the weaver pulls the threads, the fabric advances, serving the same function as a cylinder or roller. Their taxes are quite modest, primarily being a capitation tax on the men, along with supplying recruits for the army. However, many Tatars prefer to serve as Cossacks, which are exempt from this duty. The home of the citizens and villagers are similar, differing only in size and materials. Some are built of stone, but the majority are constructed from wooden beams. Every home has a jibua, or chimney, and an oruda, or bench, which often takes up 1/3 or even half of the room. The wealthier homes have glass windows, while smaller homes may use panes of Russian shluta or mica. The poor often use fish skin, oiled paper, or rags for the windows. The houses of the poorest consist of only one chamber with an entrance facing the street, covered by a cube-shaped roof. This single room typically serves as both the kitchen and the general living area with a small raised brick hearth. A farm usually includes this room, along with small magazines or barns that are often detached from each other but enclosed within a yard. Tatar villages are made up of these small huts called yurts by the Russians, and the poorer classes live in these simple, often poorly constructed dwellings. The movable possessions of the Tatars are, for the most part, only what is necessary for daily life. Their collection of kitchen and table furniture is very limited. They take their meals without much preparation and have few tools for agriculture and mechanics. A chest or two, some carpets, and pieces of felt made from the bark of trees, which they use to cover their broad benches instead of beds, along with a few chairs and tables, are all the furniture to be found in their homes. Some of the wealthier people have stuffed cushions and pillows on their sleeping benches. As for the chairs and tables, although they are listed among their goods, they are rarely seen outside of towns and are never found in homes of those who do business with foreigners. All of the Tatars of Kazan, and indeed the general population of the Muslim Tatars, shave their heads, leaving only whiskers and a small beard on their chins. They wear linen shirts, wide trousers, and budikins made of felt. The poor wear shoes made from bark. The rest of their clothing consists of a loose and light gown and upper coat that is long and wide, worn in the Eastern style, with long sleeves ending in a point, generally open on the inside of the elbow to allow them to slip the hand inside. On the outside, they fix the belt on which they wear their saber. The head is covered with a leather cap, over which they wear another flatter cap, turned up all around and padded with stuffing. A knife and tobacco pipe are attached to their sword belt. The undergarments of the poor are made of linen and wool, while the wealthier classes wear silk or gold and silver fabric. Their outer clothing is made of coarse cloth, sometimes with facings or ornamental lace. Some even wear lace upon their outer garments, and those who are wealthier decorate their caps with gold embroidery and mount their sabers with silver. The clothing of married women in all the Tatar nations, where the customs of purchasing wives is prevalent, is more expensive than that of girls. This is because a wife's attire brings honor to her husband, while a girl's clothing would be a burden to her parents. The overall dress of Tatar women closely resembles that of the men, especially with regard to shirts, trousers, stockings, budikins, slippers, and undergarments. In summer, the women's dress resembles that of the Chermiretis, as previously described. In terms of food, the Tatars differ slightly from the ways of their ancestors, but their meals are far simpler than those of the Europeans. Gruel, various dishes made from flour and bread, have become more common as their agricultural methods have improved. They now plant cabbages, peas, and a variety of vegetables and roots in their gardens, contenting themselves with the produce of the earth. The jubureks are cakes unleavened and baked over the hearth. Leavened bread and pastries are rarely used even by the wealthier classes. Rice porridge and similar dishes make up their main meals. Kurmach, a traditional dish mentioned in ancient texts and scripture, is still consumed today. It can be made from wheat, rye, barley, or Turkish corn, which is roasted over a fire and then ground into a mortar and eaten either dry, boiled, or made into porridge with water or milk. Toltin is a Tatar delicacy made of this quart mash, kneaded with butter and fried or baked in the oven. The Quran specifies which animals are pure and allows the Tatars to eat camels, horses, horned cattle, all kinds of game, fallow deer, sheep, goats, mountain rats, and birds from both fields and forests, along with all sorts of poultry and fish. At the same time, their law forbids them from touching any animal that has died of sickness or has been strangled. For this reason, the Tatars slit the throats of the animals they catch in their snares, taking care to cover the blood with earth. There are, however, many who ignore these formalities. The impure animals prohibited by the Quran include all carnivorous animals, birds of prey, hogs, amphibious creatures, insects, and every kind of worm, yet some still consume honey. Among all other meats, they prefer the flesh of colt, and their favorite dish is bisamark, or five-finger fish. It consists of chopped and stewed meat eaten with their fingers without the use of fork or spoon, which is where it gets its name. Tatar citizens who use spoons call it narin. They do not add seasoning to most of their dishes, but when they wish to make something particularly special, they add butter or grease. They drink milk alone or with flour or oatmeal, and they make butter and cheese as well. While on a journey, they put milk into bags, letting the whey drain off and turn the curd into various products. Water is the usual drink of the Tatars of Kazan, which even the wealthiest are satisfied with. Sometimes they drink milk, tea, or broths. It's rare for them to keep enough horses to use mare's milk. Although they do drink tea, their preparation is quite different from ours. They boil it in open pots with milk and water and then season it with butter and salt, drinking it hot from either china or wooden cups. The Quran forbids fermented drinks, so the Tatars abstain from wine, spirits, and beer. Despite this, many Tatars, like the majority of nations, have a particular fondness for intoxication, and thus many are not particularly temperate. Many Tatars, despite the law forbidding the consumption of intoxicating drinks, make an exception for mead and consider this a minor transgression, not a serious crime. All of them, without exception and without fear of punishment for such a small fault, make the use of mead. The common type of this liquor is made from oatmeal, flour, and honey, which are fermented together and then diluted with 7 times its volume of hot water. The mead is stored in casks with a solution of honey added, which preserves it for the use over long periods of time. Their Iran is another type of mead made from honey, whey, and wild cherries beaten together. They also have an intoxicating liquor called balsagan, which is made from yeast, meal, and hops and fermented in a similar way. All of them, men and women alike, rich and poor, smoke tobacco in great excess. The Tatars of Kazan, like most of the Muslim Tatars, are polite to both each other and to strangers. Their greeting involves grasping both hands and saying, "Salam malaikum," peace be upon you, to which the other replies, "Malikum salam," and peace be with you. It is not customary for them to uncover their heads during these greetings. Only a small number of the rich sleep on feather beds. The usual method is to place a piece of felt or carpeting over a bench that runs over the room, upon which they lie down. Few have pillows, and they never remove their clothing when they go to sleep. The Quran mandates cleanliness, which they observe to great excess. They are required to wash themselves several times a day, and to avoid impurity from urination, they perform this act while sitting on their heels. They also follow many other cleanliness practices. The Tatars typically have 4 meals a day, during which their bench serves as a table and chairs. They sit around the dishes, each person sitting on their heels in the Eastern manner. They perform absolutions and say prayers both at the beginning and end of their meals. In families of wealth, women eat and lodge separately. Women of high status wear veils whenever they appear in public, and even at home, they are rarely seen unless their husband wishes to honor his guests by showing them. Women of lower rank and servants are less retired, walking publicly more often. Old men of irreproachable character are held in great esteem among the Tatars. As their beards turn gray in old age, they receive the title of akshakal, or gray-bearded, which is a sign of wisdom and prudence. They are often consulted for advice, especially in the matters of marriage or any other significant negotiation. They act in the roles of priests, always being given preference and authority, and they serve as arbitrators in disputes. It is well known that the Quran allows polygamy, permitting a man to take no more than 4 wives, all of which have equal rights and take turns receiving their husband's care. When marrying, men focus on practical interests and economy rather than passion. Although the purchase and maintenance of wives is not particularly costly, having multiple women in a household often disturbs the peace of the family. For this reason, most men only take 1 wife, though the rich may take 2 or even 3. Very few venture to take 4. The custom is to marry a second wife as soon as the first begins to age or lose her ability to please. However, the first wife usually remains the principal one, retaining much of her husband's favor and affection. Merchants whose business takes them from city to city often maintain a wife in every place where they have a house. Whenever one of these wives has an affair, the husband simply leaves her to her lover and takes another wife for himself. The author recalls a man in Orenburg who had already divorced his 8th wife and was promised to a 9th. I'm sorry, guys, this is cracking me up. Fathers are considered guilty of sin if they withhold their sons from marrying for too long, but many commit a far worse crime by following the contrary customs of marrying their sons while they are still boys. Despite the great authority parents hold over their children, it is rare for them to force their daughters into a union against their will. As soon as the bion, or suitor, asks a girl's father for her hand, he commissions a marriage broker to negotiate the kalim, or purchase price of the bride. The price is typically paid in cattle, money, and clothes. All types of cattle are considered valuable, and there is a saying among them that the kalim can cost many heads. In the governments of Kazan and Orenburg, the kalim is seldom under the value of 20 rubles and sometimes reaches up to 500. The bride also brings a portion, sometimes a quarter, and sometimes half of the total amount. The marriage agreement consists of a public declaration of the contract made between the parties, followed by a prayer recited by a mullah. The kalim is usually paid in installments, and during this time, the young man courts his bride. These visits are called going to the bosom. The marriage ceremonies vary depending on circumstances and fortune. However, among the Tatars, it is common for the bride to undergo a ritual before the wedding. The night before, she is prepared by women who shave her private areas as part of the custom to signify purity and readiness for marriage. This preparation serves as the final step before the wedding ceremony. Those of a higher rank have learned how to procure a corrosive ointment called sourgub, which is a mixture of orpiment and quicklime combined with water or soil. It is applied 2 or 3 times in succession, and if any new hair growth remains or appears, they repeat the application. Many, to avoid having to repeat the process, boldly tear their hair out by the roots. The evening before the wedding, the bride covers herself with a veil, and her female companions gather to lament her transition from girlhood. A couple of men sing a hymn about matrimony, emphasizing that marriage is the most desirable state. They then place the bride on a carpet and carry her to the young man's house where the ceremony will take place and the new relatives have gathered. At the celebration of the marriage, the mullah asks the couple if they have resolved to be wedded together, to which they respond that they are, and that all the necessary arrangements have been made. The mullah then offers a prayer and pronounces them husband and wife. The loss of virginity before these formalities is considered a great disgrace. A young husband, if he does not find the expected signs of virginity the next morning, may either raise the issue or pretend not to notice, and by doing so, he may receive an augmentation of the dowry from the bride's parents. The nuptial celebrations are often accompanied by music and dancing, which sometimes last for several days. The kobaz is an instrument unique to them, resembling a violin with 2 strings made of hair, played with a bow. It produces a pleasant sound, though less resonant than other instruments. The musical instruments used among the Tatars are less refined than the Russian balalaika, or guitar with 2 strings. The gudli, a horizontal harp with 18 strings of catgut, is also used among the Tatars. The songs of the Tatars of Kazan and those who follow their traditions are commonly composed in blank verse, yet they are very poetic and full of expression. The lovers often compare each other to the sweet crane or the tender turtle, and present one another with their eyes, eyebrows, and more. The Tatar melodies are generally marital in nature. Men and women dance separately. The men's dances are brisk and lively, while the women's dances are composed of slow and flowing steps, with hands always held before the face. Sterility is considered a great disgrace to a wife, especially if her husband has had more than one wife. In such cases, the barren woman is often despised by those who have children. A woman who has recently given birth remains secluded until she shows signs of health, at which point she is purified with baths and prayers. The newborn child, whether male or female, must be carried within 7 days to the mullah, who whispers a prayer into the child's ear, gives the child a name, and then prays aloud. The priest typically names the child after the month or lunar phase in which it was born. Given this custom, the entire nation would have only 13 names for both men and women, so it is essential to give a child an additional name of familial significance during a ceremonial dinner. Badnia, or the circumcision of boys, takes place between the ages of 6 and 15, performed by an abdal, a man whose job it is to circumcise. This ceremony is not associated with any religious rites. The abdal travels from town to town circumcising the young boys. The wealthy pay for the poor, as being circumcised after the age of 15 is seen as shameful, so there is a great merit in helping with this charitable act. The priests visit the sick, offering prayers for their recovery. Corpses of both the men and the women are washed before burial. The deceased are wrapped in linen or cotton winding sheet in such manner that only the face is visible. In this state, they sprinkle the body with a solution of camphor. Afterwards, the priest ties a label upon the chest of the deceased with the following sentence written in Arabic: "There is but one God, and Muhammad is his prophet." Their cemeteries are called Ulir, Mesgar, and Kabri, and are often located outside villages and are unfenced. Only men attend the funeral, and the body is carried into a coffin with the head facing forward, but is placed on the earth without a coffin. The grave is typically 5 or 6 feet deep and is always positioned from the northwest to the southeast, with a space left on one side within it. In this small cavern, they place the body so that none of the earth used to fill the grave may touch it. They believe that soon after burial, 2 angels will come lead the deceased to judgment. After the burial, the mullah says prayers and the grave is covered. For the following 3 days, it is forbidden to make a fire in the home of the deceased. For the first 5 weeks following the burial, solemn prayers are said twice daily for the deceased, based on the belief that the soul's fate is decided within that period. One passage in their ritual for this occasion is, "O God, give him not over unto hell, but shortly transplant him into paradise." The wealthy distinguish the graves of their relatives by erecting a small hut of beams or by placing stones around the grave. Some place only a post with a short inscription, while others carve a large stone with an epitaph or decorate it with writing resembling the deceased signature. The more affluent often construct stately mausoleums. The inscriptions, whether in Tatar or Arabic, contain the name, rank, and year of death along with a pious sentence. For example, this epitaph is placed for Minka Artsov in the year 1112, referring to the Hegira. "Every man is mortal. God alone is eternal. The prophet says he who worships God and abstains from sin has Muhammad as his nearest kinsman." Near the river Dioma, in the neighborhood of Ufa, there is a sepulchral chapel with a stone bearing an inscription, the translation of which is Has Hufsaim Bayeth, learned in all the laws, a judge by the rules of justice, is dead. To you we make our prayer, thou only God, to have compassion upon him and to grant him thy favor by remission of his sins. He died in the year 744 on the 7th night of the sacred month. He labored and would have continued his labors, but death came, who frustrate the designs of men. None of us shall live here eternally. Let everyone, on beholding his tomb, think on his last hour. Without delving into the details of the Muslim doctrines and opinions, it is only necessary to explain that general ceremonies and beliefs of the followers of Muhammad in the Russian Empire. Even a moderate degree of zeal in matters of religion is considered a mortal sin, so each village has its medreses or chapel where services are held. In their cities, mosques are spacious and neat, but without any ornamentation. There is an elevated area inside where the Quran is read and explained. The floor of the mosque is always covered with carpets, and near the entrance there is a small vestibule where everyone removes their shoes before entering the house of prayer. The medreses in the small villages are poorly constructed little huts, and instead of a steeple, they have a gallery at the top, from which the sexton calls the people to their devotions. The clergy is composed of aguns or high priests, mullahs or priests, abifs or schoolmasters, and muazzins or sextons. One agun has his seat at Kazan, another at Tobolsk, and a third at Astrakhan. The ecclesiastics have no settled revenue, though their roles sometimes brings in some income. However, the mullahs are often obliged to engage in commerce or learn some mechanical trade to earn a living. According to their belief, a Muslim defiles himself by touching a dead body, eating unclean food, or by any natural excretions, and by many other actions. On the other hand, they believe that bathing and prayer purify the body and that piety and good deeds are meritorious for heaven. They practice several forms of bathing, but the most common is washing themselves. In the absence of water, they rub their hands with earth or sand. Their good work consists primarily of giving alms and fasting. They observe 205 fasting days a year, on which they are required to refrain from eating meat and certain foods, as well as from drinking anything from sunrise to sunset. The Tatars firmly believe that the destiny of every man is fixed and inevitable, and that the angel of death calls upon him at his appointed hour. This belief sustains them in times of adversity and protects them from unaliving themselves. Although there are no monks in the Russian Empire among the Tatars, many practice a form of piety bordering on fanaticism. They believe that through great devotion it is possible to become a saint, and that the departed saints receive the prayers of the living. The Tatars hold their tombs in great veneration, attributing to them several miraculous virtues. Many of these tombs of different Tatar saints are found in the deserts of Kyrgyzstan, near Giva, among the ruins of Bulamar, and especially at Turkestan. Their religious festivals are regulated by the lunar cycles, including the Molt Barim, the anniversary of the birth of Muhammad, the Korban Barim, Ramazan, and many others. 5 times of prayer are observed every day. They are called to prayer by the sexton from the turret of their mosques. He sings their creed. There is but one God, and Muhammad is his prophet. They rarely neglect any of these prayer times, but if anyone is hindered from praying publicly, they are expected to pray privately, either at the rising or setting of the sun in their house or even in the open air if they are on a journey. On these occasions, they remove their shoes, or at the very least, they spread their coat upon the ground and sit cross-legged while offering their prayers. Nothing is able to interrupt their devotion. The prayers are performed with the utmost fervor, turning their faces towards Mecca, or if at home, towards the word Allah. the greatest name of the Most High, which every man writes upon some part of his room. The 5 universal prayers are the Namaz Bandal, the prayer said at sunrise, the Namaz Bikni, said at noon, the Namaz Diga, said in the afternoon, Namaz Jehen in the evening, and Namaz Kalfam, the night prayer. Each of these lasts for about an hour. Before going to the chapel, the Tatars bathe at home and afterwards put on their regular clothes. Every one of them, rich or poor, removes their shoes before entering the chapel. The rich in prayer wear a shalma, or Turkish turban, and the Aguns always wear their caps during the mosque functions. The prayers of the Tatars are always in Arabic and are performed with utmost devotion, with each person holding a rosary in their hand by which they count their prayers. The priest sits cross-legged upon his heels, facing the congregation, and recites the prayers in a soft and emotional tone of voice. The assembly repeats them, or answers Amin to each. When the word Allah is pronounced, everyone heaves a profound sigh, stops their ears, and places their hands over their eyes and beards, as if unworthy to hear the glorious name, and lifts their eyes towards heaven. During prayers addressed to the tutelary angels, they cast their eyes to the right and left. In other parts of their service, they sit upon their heels, rise often, make a deep bow, and remain in that posture for some time, sometimes even prostrating themselves with their faces to the ground. They wash themselves before taking an oath, then striking the Quran 3 times against their chest, they pronounce these words, "May thy curses strike me if I make a false oath." So that concludes chapter 2. And there are a couple of things I want to point out in this segment, the most important of which is the fact that the Tatars began their calendar year on the vernal equinox. That's the day in the spring where there's equal light and dark hours, where the days start to become longer than the nights. And this tells me that the Tartars understood the precessional cycle of the planet, at least to some extent. They likely practiced some form of sidereal astrology. It's not explicitly stated whether they believed in the tropical or the sidereal, but considering they are tracking the actual positions of the stars, the actual positions of the moon and the sun, rather than a model based on where the stars were 2,000 years ago, like the tropical zodiac does, it tells me that they likely believed in some variation of sidereal astrology, likely with 13 constellations. What truly fascinated me about this is the fact that all of the Tatars believed in astrology so much that they named all of their children after the positions of the luminaries at the time of their births. Their entire society was based around this. Their priests were responsible for this astrological naming. So even though these people practiced Islam, they also practiced astrology. It was a combination of Islam and astrology. They were, in fact, likely the last astrotheistic society on this planet. At this point in Europe, we know that astrology had been banned throughout all of the Holy Roman Empire and Papal territory ever since Pope Sixtus V's decree in the late 1500s, where he deemed astrology to be outlawed and illegal. And even before then, the papacy was sending inquisitioners and legates out to various cities like Prague and burning heretics at the stake for daring to practice astrotheism. So maybe this is why the legacy of the Tatars was so heavily whitewashed in the years to follow. People talk about architecture all the time and high technology. I'm not sure if that was it. That might have been an aspect of it. Seen no evidence of that so far in this text, that these people were capable of practicing using antiquitech or atmospheric electricity or harnessing energy from the ether. I don't see any evidence of that in this text. I'm not saying that it didn't happen or that the really ancient Tatars, like the Oghuz Khan Tatars, weren't capable of doing this. But in this society, it doesn't seem like that is what's going on here. It's seeming that they were practicing astrotheism. devout astrotheism, to the point where they're naming all their children after the luminaries, while at the same time believing deeply in Islam. One other thing I want to mention before we move on into the next chapter is that our authors, William Tooke and Johan Georgi, were not immune to personal bias. You need to remember these guys were English-speaking subjects of the Russian Empire who were essentially traveling around to all these colonies that Russia had just conquered and observing the Tatars as foreigners. And this bias is about to really ramp up in the next chapter, as you will soon see. We're about to talk about the Nogayan Tatars, or the Nogai, who were still independent and at war with Russia at the time of this book's writing. This book was published in 1780, remember, and Catherine the Great's invasion of 1783 didn't happen until less than 3 years after this book's publication. So you'll see in this next chapter how they discuss the Nogayan Tatars and how they discuss them with great disdain. And it's also clear that our authors were not allowed to actually observe the Nogayan Tatars from up close or inside their territory. They are essentially operating off rumor and speculation. Whereas with these other groups, they could actually travel around to these colonies and live amongst them for periods of time and observe their actions up close. And you'll see in this next segment, they really are quite slanderous in their accusations against the Nogai. Which, I mean, Russia was literally at war with this group, so it's sort of understandable why these Russian authors needed to write in this manner. You know, they're not going to say a bunch of nice things about the group that they're at war with and trying to conquer. I mean, they'll probably be burned at the stake if they do that. So, just something to keep in mind as we move forward in this book. I still think it's a very, probably one of the most accurate portrayals of the Tatar society during this period of time. And it's really fascinating to get a glimpse behind the curtain. And it's incredible that this book is even on the public domain nowadays, because so much has been destroyed during the Soviet Union's rise to power. So much has been reattributed. It's amazing to see them talking about these stone mosques and stone buildings and these mausoleums built out of brick and hewn rock that still exist at the time of the author's writing in 1780, and they likely still exist today and have just been reattributed. Which is so fascinating to me, that we have buildings in Russia today that they're just taking credit for. Like Sumbeka Tower is one of the most obvious. They're like, oh, we don't know where this building came from. They say, oh, Ivan the Terrible's artisans, they built it in a week. That's what Wikipedia says about Sumbeka Tower. It's completely absurd. Many of these buildings were built by the Tatars. The Blue Mosque in Kazan was probably built by the Tatars. The stone walls and fortifications probably built by the Tatars as well. So, anyways, I'll get off my soapbox for now. Let's move on to the next chapter.